Good afternoon. Welcome to another edition of FAMM's Heart to Heart series. My name is Kevin Ring. I'm president of FAMM, and today we're going to have a discussion I've been looking forward to for a while. There seems to be an increasing sympathy and compassion for those who have loved ones in prison. But there's a question about whether that compassion extends to everyone. And what we've seen over the years is that even among family members who have loved ones in prison, there's a comparison or an opting out of, well, my loved one only did this, they didn't do that. And we see family members struggle with the burden of advocating for a loved one who might have done something that is a more serious crime. And people have less compassion and sympathy for those people. And we see that then turn out in different policies. Sometimes reforms exclude people who are convicted of certain crimes, even when the reform has nothing to do with shortening sentences. Amendment 4 was the great reform that was passed in Florida on the ballot that allowed people who had committed felonies to vote, but that excluded people convicted of sex offenses and convicted of murder. And that shouldn't be relevant at all to your vote if you have served your time and you are, paid your debt to society. But we know that the politics still prevents that. And so in this area, what we find is that the issue is not so much just politicians, it's one another as a society. There seems to be people that we just can't find room in our hearts to feel empathy for, and that results in them being excluded from the reforms that we seek to pass. To begin a discussion about how we stop doing those exclusions, we want to talk about people who are advocates in this area for loved ones, so that you can get a sense of what it's like for them and how much more difficult their burden is to be an advocate when your loved one committed a crime that many people in the country find heinous or disgusting or outrageous and don't have sympathy for. So I'm really grateful that they're willing to talk about that. We have Antoinette, Heather Wagner, Juanita Belton. I want to say Juanita is part of a new group called Sisters for Reform. Is that right?
Sisters in Prison Reform.
Sisters in Prison Reform in Virginia. And we are working with them for reform in Virginia, and so I'm glad she was able to join us. But I just want to go around and briefly ask you to just let us know who your loved one is that's in prison, and what crime they were convicted of. And I'll start with you, Antoinette.
My son, he's been in prison for 28 years, serving life without parole on a third-degree murder charge.
All right. And Heather?
My husband is serving a 70-month prison sentence for looking at child pornography.
And Juanita?
My best friend is now in his 23rd year for arson, first-degree murder, and use of a firearm in the commission of a felony.
So when we talk about sentencing and prison reform, there's so much focus on, or there used to be low-level nonviolent drug offenders, and there's some growth in this area, but we're talking about crimes that are the hardest ones for some people to get their head around in terms of addressing with reform and believing in second chances for. FAMM's Second Chances agenda is designed to give people who committed more serious offenses a second chance or an opportunity for a second chance. And so we're very interested in this topic. And I want to start with you, Antoinette. When did you become an advocate for your son? Always as a mother, but when did you realize that he had done something wrong, but this punishment was too severe, and that you wanted to fight for reform and for justice for him?
About 2.5 years ago, I became an advocate.
And what was that? What hurdles did you face in becoming an advocate? Were you private before? Were you embarrassed about this? What did you feel?
Well, yes, about 25 years, I was completely silent. I never shared my story with anyone because of the crime, and a lot of people just looked down on that, and there was no support. So I was too embarrassed to talk about it for the 28 years. And so 2 years ago, I became an advocate with FAMM, and I started telling my story, and that's where I began my healing process, actually. The more I told my story, the more I could see myself healing and helping other people. So once I realized there was more families in the same situation as my son, it helped me better to deal with everything.
And what has been the reaction that you've received from people?
The reaction I received was I have a lot of negative and a lot of positive reactions. A lot of people look at him as a monster. He deserved to do the time for the crime. And the positive reaction is from more advocate people that actually is in the exact same situation that I'm in. And so that's where it gave me energy to carry on to be an advocate. And with support from FAMM, it helped me continue on with my advocacy.
Well, thank you. And, we are proud to work with you and are glad you have found your voice. Heather, I want to talk to you. Your husband committed the crime that, is really the one that people don't want to talk about, anything dealing with sexual offenses. And, I see that even among our own families. I mean, how hard was it for you to talk about this and be public about it?
Oh boy, it was really hard. I mean, I understand it, but not everybody understands it like I understand it. And putting a voice behind it, I guess for me, because I'm a little relentless, I've chosen to educate myself. I just continue to talk and talk and talk until that person is like, whoa, I can't think of this the way that I used to. I can't see this crime the way that I used to in the way that you're educating me. And that's really the key, I think, to all of these hard cases is education and removing that emotion so that we can have the talk.
And how's the reaction been? I mean, that you do have a hard one to talk about. What is the reaction from other family members, community members, strangers? What's it like?
So my husband's whole family walked out on him. My husband has no family, including his own son. My husband has myself, has my mother, has my sister and my nephew. My family walks by him. And we have more non-blood family. So just friends that have been there and wanting to wanting to understand, wanting to learn more, because they see they're not closed off. They're going, something made you go down this path. And like I said, hurt people. So my husband was a hurting man to do what he did. And just like in your aha moment article that you posted, that's really at the heart of this. When I say my husband is a victim who was re-victimizing, I now have an open door to start elaborating. Because a lot of people don't realize that childhood molestation, and I say that very lightly because that's a painful word, when we really should be elaborating more and saying it's a welcome word that we can talk about. And when I started painting that my husband was a victim, I got mixed emotions. But what I realized is more people want to emphasize and focus on the now and what his choices are now, opposed to hearing that he was a victim between birth and age 8 by 4 family members. In addition to another thing that leads you down this path is parental abandonment. And his mother hated him from in utero. And that's all he ever heard was, I hate you. So you find your identity through images. And like I said, as I talk, people are going, wow, I didn't think about that. I didn't realize it was that. Or why, I just go there.
Right. I appreciate that. Well, Juanita, how about your experience? When did you start becoming an advocate for your best friend? And I'm never going to remember, it's Sisters for Prison Reform and Prison Reform.
So it's Sisters in Prison Reform. Don't worry. I'll repeat it over and over.
Good. I want you guys to get attention.
So I've actually known my loved one since we were 15 years old. So his incarceration at 18 affected me, but I was 18 years old. So no idea, what 45 years meant. So here we are, fast forward now, age 40. And obviously I'm in a better place to be able to advocate. And we reconnected sort of back and forth, but like really in the last year and a half. And I was like, okay, so what are we doing? How are we getting you out? What, what's the next steps? Because obviously over the last, 20 something years, reform was sort of in the background, and now like more people are talking about it, and more people like things have to change in the justice system. So that's what I was saying to him. And it started with me participating in terms of watching the General Assembly in Virginia and just learning about the different laws that were being in the bills that were being presented. And then when things weren't going his way because he's got a violent conviction, I met Santia Nance and Pauletta James, and their loved ones also have violent convictions in Virginia. And we're like, we started noticing, hey, they're leaving them out, for nonviolent convictions. And that's not fair. We didn't think that was fair. We thought, our loved ones have done X amount of time, and, all of them are now in their like 15th and 20th year. And so, but they've done a lot of things to rehabilitate themselves. And we're like, they deserve to get noticed too. It shouldn't just be the label here. It's not a one size fits all system. If it were, it'd be fair for people that look like myself and Antoinette, but it's not, right? So we decided to form Sisters in Prison Reform and speak for those behind the wall that have been there for decades, that reform has forgotten and, is doing nothing for, and we're trying to be their voice.
Yeah.
So.
Let me just say, if people accept the idea that we have mass incarceration in this country, it's not because of the drug war. It is because of the incredibly long sentences we give to people who commit violent offenses that are outliers with the rest of the world. That's what is driving our prison population. And let me stay with you, Juanita. When you make sense. I don't want to get too much into the details of his case. How do people look at somebody who committed a serious crime like that, murder? And was he a monster then and isn't now? Are we all half monster, half okay? Like, how do you make sense of that?
So the good thing about knowing him since he was 15, I know he wasn't a monster. I mean, he was a teenager like Heather said, childhood trauma, parental abandonment, things like that. But when he was a teenager, he was involved in a lot of community activity. He was a community activist. And things happened then, and he got involved in the wrong things, right? He was a teenager. I'm not making excuses for that, but studies show that teenagers, they don't have the mind capacity to make certain decisions that I myself at 41 years old would not make. So when I have these conversations about people, I think the word murderer, or just like rapist, elicits an emotional response. And so people are reacting to the title versus listening to what actually occurred in the facts. People don't want to hear the facts, right? They just hear the word murderer or rapist. I mean, you see it when people are on the Senate floors, right? They're like, oh, we're going to let all the murders and rapists out. No, you're not. You're letting people out who rehabilitated themselves out. And we need to stop putting labels on things, because at the end of the day, this isn't a fashion show, right? You're not going to get a reward because your crime is nonviolent and his crime is violent. Everybody gets on the same bus, go to the same prison, gets the same jumpsuit, and nobody cares if your crime is violent versus nonviolent. So we need to cut that out. Yeah.
Well, and also, no one's not arguing that the sentences shouldn't be proportional, that somebody who commits a more serious offense should get a more serious penalty. It's just how long does that need to be? Heather, how do you square with the, on paper, part of the reason like we want to talk to people is because if you can't humanize, people and show them the people behind these headlines or crimes or whatever, it's easy to otherize them and keep them abstract and make them into monsters. Somebody reading about your husband, I mean, that's gonna, that's the feeling. It's like that. I would never do that. So that person's a monster, right? I think that's part of our issue, even in our country right now, is, drug offenders, white collar offenders. It's like, oh, I could see myself doing that. And then there's countries like, well, I would never do that. So I can't have sympathy for that. So, but there's usually stories behind this. So, I mean, how do you make sense of that when somebody's like, anybody who would do that is a monster. I'm not advocating for someone like that.
I mean, so just like the other topics, you have to find a listening ear. Not everybody's going to want to listen. Not everybody's going to want to hear it. And I've kind of been a bully, I guess you'd say, about the topic, because it's about time we talk. It's about time we break down the barriers, and I find some way somehow to just talk about it. But it's not easy. My husband's not a monster. He is far from a monster, nothing but a hardworking man who has always been employed, who has made sure that there's been a roof over my head. We've never been on government assistance. We've never, he prided himself. He was a hurting man, and that's what his psychiatric evaluation labeled him as, a hypersexual male with PTSD struggling from his childhood trauma. So when you get that kind of a label from a psychiatrist, why are we continuing to call him a monster?
Well, people, what about people say, look, okay, that may explain it, but he still can't be in society then. I mean, I'm not going to judge him. He made his mistake, but for everybody else's safety, he needs to be removed. What do you say?
Well, I think we should probably get rid of half of society right there. I mean, there's so many people that have not been caught for this. There's people that I just don't see. I see where they're coming from, but on the flip side, I'm into mental health. I want to understand how somebody functions, and that's where we're not giving these people a chance. Is trying to understand them. No, I'm a rape by gunpoint survivor. I would have not tried to go out and hurt somebody else in my trauma, but this is the way. So from a psychologist standpoint, by seeing himself, although he never sought this out, it was given to him, he identified with it. And when he went back to look at it after getting out of it, he was wondering, was that my facial feature? Was that the way that I was looking? Did my room look like that? I mean, he was reliving his trauma through his choices, which is very typical of somebody who's been molested, unfortunately, because it's not a welcome topic. We can talk about alcohol, drugs, gambling, cutting, food, and they're on this side of the equation. But sex is a Grand Canyon width away. And although there's so many parallels, we're not going to make those parallels. We're just going to say you're just a lost cause.
Yeah. And I find that, to try to understand something isn't to condone it or to excuse it, but it is to try to understand it so that we can treat it or overcome it. And I feel like in criminal justice reform, everybody has somebody they hate, I feel like. And when you work on these tougher cases, you realize that, it's like the Ted Lasso series and the quote from, I think it's Walt Whitman. I think, it's like, be curious, not judgmental, and figure out what made the person do that. That doesn't mean you don't think they should be held accountable or they need to be punished, but understanding why they did it, then maybe we could prevent it. And I feel like we can do that with certain people who commit certain crimes. Again, I said, because of our experience, we say, okay, I get that. And then some other ones, we don't want to be curious. We're like, nothing could explain why that happened. That person's just bad. And I think, but we all have a blind spot for certain people, certain types of offenses, it seems, that we do that. Antoinette, I just want to ask you, because somebody asked us, you talked about being silent for so long. Did that help you? Did that protect you? Or was this a secret that burdened you? Was it easier to let this go? Or how do you look back at that time?
Looking back at that time, it was easy to be quiet, but it didn't help me at all, because it's better to talk about things and try to understand what happened. But at the time, I was so traumatized of what happened myself, I just shut down for my own protection, for my feelings and my emotions, and learning that being silenced about something, a loved one being incarcerated, it only hurts not only the incarcerated one, but the family and myself, because you can't heal if you don't talk about it. And trying to get people to understand why I was quiet is the big factor, because I get that question all the time. Why was you so quiet about it? Well, 28 years ago, nobody was talking about it, period. Mm-hmm. Especially here in Pittsburgh. There was no support system, and it was just be quiet, because soon you talk about it, somebody's going to judge you, and they're not going to see a clear picture on how to understand what happened, or they don't even want to try to understand what happened. So being quiet for the 28 years, it didn't help at all.
Well, I want to ask you this because when we did our Visit a Prison campaign, where we challenged policymakers, state and federal, to visit prisons so that they could see the conditions and meet the people who were inside, again, in an effort to humanize folks who are locked up, there were, we would create sort of social media graphics and people put it on their Facebook page, like a frame. And some people didn't want to do that because their sort of personal friends or business or friends from work would see that frame, and those people didn't know about that. So there does seem to still be that stigma. And I want to ask you, Antoinette, how has it been even in your own family in terms of talking about this? I mean, I'm glad that FAMM has been able to work with you, but where else do you find support? Or are you alone in your family in this fight? Or,
Yes, I am very alone in this fight. My family, I think it was just too hard for them to even grasp, to even try to figure out how to deal with it, or should they be quiet? But everybody assumed that he was guilty. Nobody tried to understand what was going on. So my family, everybody did turn their back, and I am the only one speaking on my son's behalf. And I will continue speaking on his behalf. Now, I will never be silent again. So the 25 years I was silent was not good. So now I'm trying to get my family involved more to help, but they're still not budging.
Yeah. Juanita, I want to bring you in and ask you, well, one, I have a question, but do you want to comment on anything you've heard?
Actually earlier you and Heather were saying about people, taking people out of society, or, do they belong in society? And I just find it interesting that we as flawed human beings, we decide on if someone else should be in or out of society. And I feel like if it were that simple, then let me pluck a few people out and who didn't even commit crimes, right? Mm-hmm. Like we're a flawed society. Like how do we judge other people like that, and say that they don't belong here? We're all here. Like, why don't we have grace and mercy for somebody who makes a mistake or, a bad decision, and atones for it, like works on themselves to do it. So it just always amazes me how.
Well, let me drill down that a little further. You think there are some people, maybe through no fault of their own, they suffer from psychopathy or something. There are some people who do harm others, and short of some intervention, whether it's prison, quarantine, hospital, they will hurt others. We need to pull some people out of society sometimes, right? So
right, like yes, you're right. There are people that do hurt others, and we also need to get to the bottom of why people hurt people. Right. Like jail is not mental health facilities. A lot of people who hurt people are individuals who are hurt themselves, like Heather said. Yeah. They're not facilities meant for that. So you can't pull somebody who's, may have psychopathic tendencies and put them in prison and expect that that's going to fix their psychopathic tendencies. And I've worked in a house of corrections for a year as a medical provider. So I know how some of these psychiatrists deal with these patients. They drug them up. They don't deal with the issues that have brought them in there. Let's just be 100% real about it.
Right. That's not the place to be if you are.
It's not. Yeah. Neither is it for people who do drugs.
Right. All right. Well, I'm going to start with you on this one since you're on the big screen here. The difference with these crimes than some of the other ones is there's a victim. Usually, and sometimes it's a more clear in the case of a murder or a rape. It's a clearer victim. Case of child pornography, there's victims, how they are impacted is subject to debate. How do you wrestle with that? That, we say this person needs a second chance, and what people say, oh, well, my loved one didn't get a second chance. And how do you put, because you're good at this, how do you put yourself in the mind of the victim's family, and how should we think about them in terms of how we hold people accountable?
So two things. I'm a victim or a survivor, excuse me. I don't use the word victim. I'm a survivor of a sexual crime myself at 15 years old. And, you know, it's taken years of work on myself to get to a point where I'm doing well, you know, but that took me working on myself. And I have to give my mom credit for teaching me about forgiveness, right? Not for the person who harmed me, but but for myself. And that sounds cliche, but if I hold on to it, and this is just me, my opinion, if I hold on to it, it does a lot more harm to me than it does for that person, right? And for me, someone sitting in prison for 40, 50, 60 years, that doesn't do anything for me. And can I say a quick quote that I thought was just 100% real? And it was by Reverend Ben Knotts, who's in Virginia. And I love talking with him. But he said, vengeance is not about restoration of skills or accountability. Justice is. Vengeance is about punishment for the sake of emotional satisfaction that can't be attained. That last part, it cannot be attained. Our justice system is supposed to be separate from our emotions, you know, so therefore, like, justice is supposed to be what it is. It's supposed to serve justice. It can't soothe our emotional issues. We have to do that.
But
so
you know,
that's how I feel about it.
You know what? I agree with that, and I think that is the thing. And I asked this sort of famous social psychologist who I'm a fanboy of, he's written books, and I had a mutual friend, and I reached out and I said, you know, some of the prescriptions and policies we're pushing, they may shorten sentences, whatever, but they'd actually result in more safety because these people don't need the sentences they're getting. If we didn't waste money incarcerating them so long, we could put funding into other things, treatments, preventions that would do it. So shouldn't we argue that that's being tougher actually on crime because that will reduce crime? And he said that, you know, we do have the impulse to punish. There is an anger and a vengeance there.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think if Derek Chauvin, you know, people could be convinced he may never hurt another fly the rest of his life, but we want him to be held accountable for what he did, right? So there's a justice seeking part of it. Bernie Madoff, we're angry at him. It's not that we think he's probably going to defraud another million people. We're angry at him. And so it seems like those are the things we have to balance, is when our anger gets out of control versus what's the goal of this? Is it just to keep everybody safe and make people whole? Or is it just to, you know, exact our revenge and anger on them?
Well, see, when there's studies that already show that long prison sentences don't increase public safety, like, you're just exacting vengeance at this point. It's no different than, you know, lawmakers that get on the floor and they use their emotions to get what they want. Like, no, that's not what this is about. You know, if you want to be real and honest with it, people do their crime. They're supposed to get punished. I'm not saying that they're not supposed to, but when they're there, the purpose is to be really rehabilitated. Where you cannot say if anybody's ever going to commit a crime again. That's just not possible. You and I can go out right now and commit a crime, right? I've never committed.
I've already been in prison.
I know. But that's why I said I've never. But the point is that I can go out and commit a crime right now. You know what I mean? Like, there's nothing that's going to say that someone's never going to do something again. Right. But if you provide the tools to help them to potentially not do something again, that's what's needed, not vengeance. Like, it just doesn't work.
Right. No, I well said. Heather, I know you enough to know that it must be hard to not want to chime in here, because I'm gonna start. You can add to anything we've said, but I also want to we got a question that said, is your husband getting any treatment in prison? You're muted.
Lee, oops.
There you go. You're on.
The answer currently is yes. He was blessed to be able to get into the RDAP program. And the only reason why he was able to get in there is because from the psychiatric evaluation, it was deemed that maternal and paternal side have so much addiction that they want him to be able to be aware of what the addiction could be and turn into post-prison. But the funny thing is, or not funny, but our judge, our prosecution didn't even see that this was a hurting man. My husband invested himself in therapy before this, at my cost, at my healthy boundaries. After his state arrest, which was just a 24-hour thing, I gave him the number to Sex Addicts Anonymous, also known as SAA. A lot of people don't know it's out there. It's a sister program to AA and NA. And he called that within a few hours. 2 weeks later, I had him in counseling. He was addressing his issues just at the beginning, in addition to working 50 to 60 hours a week as a commercial truck driver. He was getting his help, but we overlooked that. And what got me into the advocacy is because the psychiatrist wrote a personalized note to the judge that said, this is a man who is seeking help for his problems, and we should keep him in his therapy and recovery group, but mandatory minimums are going to send this man to prison. That didn't settle right with me when you have a psychiatrist who says, get help. Now, in prison, up until he was invited into RDAP in January, he's had to self-heal. And I have been sending him so many books about this particular topic that he has learned more about himself. And in that, he's regurgitating what he's learned to teach me so that I can understand. Because in my marriage, failure is not an option. There's something that he chose to go down this path for a reason. And now I understand why, and I'm going to stand up and I'm going to advocate for it.
Appreciate that. Antoinette, I don't want to be guilty of the same thing that I say society does, which is view all of these people as one-dimensional, that they committed a crime and that's how we define them. So this is your son who's in prison for murder. It's not some abstract person. Tell us about your son, and what's a fuller picture of who he is than just the crime he committed?
Well, he was sentenced to prison when he was 19. Now he's been in there for 28 years, and I don't understand why the Department of Corrections say it's rehabilitation. They're strictly for punishment. They don't try to see who he is as a person now, which he's on an honor block. He's going to college, paralegal. He haven't been in trouble at all since he's been in there for 28 years. He become a better person, and he acknowledged what he did, and he just need help, somebody to see his case. For 28 years, it's been a nightmare to get anyone to take his case or try to even understand why he's in there. So he's a great man. And I'm quite sure people, might say, no, he's not a great man because he did something terrible. He's still a person, Anybody could do something terrible. I must say, we all never know what might make us snap, and you don't know the state of mind of a person at that age, at 19. They're just not thinking. So right now, he's a great man, and he's doing the best he can to become a better person. And he's on the honor block, like I said, and he get highly recommended from the guards in the ward from inside the prison. So if they could see that he's a better man, why can't society accept him?
What's Jay's Cafe?
Okay. So, and that's the story of my son. Like, he's just doing everything he can to be a better person, and he is a better person. And so for people to judge him and call him a monster and this and that, it's just not good for society to just throw away the key and forget about him, So how do we get somebody to hear my son's case? Because a lawyer won't even look at his case, and he's in an integrity unit.
And how old is he now?
He's 40, he's almost 50. Okay. So he's between 48 and 49.
Hey.
You do the math. He was born in 1972.
It's hard to keep track, right?
I can remember that part.
Well, thank you.
So it's just too many years that he's been sitting in prison, and nobody want to listen to his story or take the time out to try to understand what happened. And I'm not talking about lawyers, lawmakers, even family members. Just come together and try to understand what happened. And then you will see that he is a good person. So when we say visit a prison, I would like for you to visit a prison, visit my son, go in his cell and sit with him and talk to him in his environment where he's at now and try to get a better understanding of him.
I appreciate that.
Give him a second chance. He
Yeah.
deserves a second chance.
Juanita, can you sort of bring your loved one to sort of three-dimensional, not just the crime he committed, but who is he and what do you know of him?
He's amazing. No, he is. His name is Sincere. He's a Nottoway. He is a mentor and a therapeutic aide in the Shared Allied Mentor Program, which is a program in Virginia prisons, where he helps to mentor other men in his pod that are affected by substance abuse and mental health disorders. Through this program, he facilitates workshops, and he's actually created his own workshop that they let him do, where he teaches other incarcerated men about goal setting, having interpersonal goals, skill building, like leadership skill building, because he believes that people you don't need to prepare to be a better prisoner, right? You need to be prepared to be on the outside world. And, he's kept in employment the entire time that he's been incarcerated. He's gotten his GED. He's been why am I losing my train of thought? The tutor. He's been a tutor for other people trying to get their own GEDs. He's well read. If you have a conversation with him, let's just say if you were on the phone and had a conversation with him, I don't know, this sounds bad, but you wouldn't even know that he's been incarcerated for 20-something years. Like, he's used that time to read, to study, to build himself. He's been infraction-free for several years. He's just a good guy, and he has a plan. He's got many certifications, and the thing that I like really quickly is he's aligned his certifications, like in NA, AA, mindfulness, because his goal is to be a peer support recovery specialist when he gets out of prison. And he's actually can get certification for that in prison. So he's taking all these certifications.
That's good. Yeah,
right,
that's smart.
make himself marketable when he gets out of prison. So he the plan is not for him to be there another 18 years. That's this is all wasted potential right here.
Yeah,
everyone's loved one. There's so much potential. He has friends who have been paroled. One has a graphic design business. One has been working. They're all advocates. They all people who served over 20 some odd years in prison for violent convictions. So it's doable. Not everybody wants to come out and do crime again. They want to come out and live, have families, and work. And he deserves it.
And people who are outside need to hire these people when they come out.
Right.
That's, we got to give him a chance. Heather, can you make your husband human and not talk, let's not talk about crimes. Let's talk about who he is, the good.
He's just an amazing man with a big heart. He's just a teddy bear. She talked about employment. His last employer, I remember him saying, I can't lose Larry. I can't lose him. He's a needle in a haystack find as far as an employee. He's a hard worker. He always wanted to make sure that his son and myself, we had the best, always going above and beyond as far as working, translate that to where he currently is. Because of his crime, he's not entitled to be able to learn the things that he would like to learn. But one thing that I'm so proud of him from his jail arrest, it was about 2 weeks after, he asked me for a Sex Addicts Anonymous book and to mail it to him. And he was mentoring inside of jail. And he says, if I was going to go down this road, I'm going to take others to healing with me. And he has done that in prison as well. Because of the crime, he has to meet with these groups in secret. The guards actually try to stop it. And so he gets 1 hour a week at rec, and that's where he has whoever he can meet him and they do this. He also is working on Celebrate Recovery. I sent him the literature for that. But the prison doesn't want either of those in there. But my husband is not taking no for an answer. He said, I need help. You took me out of help. I'm not the only one that needs help. And he's just doing the best that he can. He's just an amazing guy. That's all I can say. I mean, I wouldn't be fighting for him the way that I am if he wasn't this amazing man. We just celebrated 20 years married. That's a long time to get to know somebody. And to be honest with you, Kevin, knowing that we've been together over 20 years, I'm learning things about my husband now that he didn't know about himself, which is going to make him stronger on the outside. But this is his mission, is to get the sex topic out there.
Yeah. I got a. Are you raising your hand, Juanita?
Yeah, I just wanted to say one more thing,
Yeah.
especially with Antoinette and Sincere, whose crimes were committed when they were teenagers.
Yeah.
They were teenagers. Like like Antoinette's son is almost 50 years old. At this point, he should be home.
Yeah. Let me say, one thing that I regret is that it took me having experience with the justice system to understand it the way that I do. When I was younger, I just had different life experiences than people. And so you know what your experiences are and what the world around you is. And so I didn't know people who were selling drugs or whose parents were in prison. At least I didn't know if they were. I mean, that wasn't my experience. And having gone through this experience, you can't unsee it. And then you see the problems and you want to fix it. Do you guys have suggestions for how, you can make this real? I think Antoinette, sort of the visit prison was part of this idea, but how do you, without them experiencing it themselves, how do we make this real to people who otherwise don't want to think about it? And as advocates, how can you encourage that sort of empathy without these people having been through it? Juanita, you must have thought about this.
Yeah, start talking about it. Start humanizing your loved one. I hate to say humanizing, right? Because like you take away the humanity, but no, start humanizing them. What we do on Sisters in Prison Reform, we all have Twitter pages plus a Twitter page plus a website, and we talk about them. We Twitter people in their DMs and we say, hey, can we meet with you? We want to talk to you about our loved ones. We just want to, let you know what they're doing. We've met many people that way. Start talking about them. Talk about the good things about them, not focusing on necessarily their crime, especially if someone's been in prison 20 something years ago. That's then. It's neither guilt nor innocence at this point. It's who they are at this point. Talk to people.
Yeah. Antoinette, what do you think?
Agree with her. People have to start talking and understanding and just keep talking and advocating and just talk to as many people as you can and reach out and try to help them understand, which they may not understand, but once you start talking more and more, then they would want to know more. And once you know more, you have knowledge. Knowledge is powerful. So, just get all the knowledge you can, and just get involved and advocate and know people on a personal level. And once you get to know somebody on a personal level, then we could get the conversation going and get more people involved.
Yeah, Heather, you want to add to that?
So I echo what they say. You have to talk about it. I've been pretty silent. Well, no, not pretty silent, but I have been blessed to find other women and a couple of men, but women who are being vocal like myself in my advocacy. I've written letters. I've done a podcast. I talk to whoever I can. I formed my own small group here with those that can identify. But again, I've just been blessed to be with a group of, I think we were 27 women on a Zoom meeting the other night. And the ways that we can bring this to light and talk about this, I'll just leave it at that, Kevin, because I can talk your ear off.
No, it's good. I think the same thing. Like when I've spoken to colleges or high schools and I I will sometimes ask, raise your hand if you have an immediate family member or a close family friend who has spent time in prison. And it's amazing how many people raise their hand. And yet it's probably something they don't talk about. And so, we have all these people affected by the system, but we don't talk about it because of the shame and stigma and other, things. I have daughters, who didn't want to talk about it or address it. That was embarrassing to be a teenager and have a dad who was in prison, right? And so I get it. And yet the experience is out there for people to have because their neighbors and loved ones have had this experience. It's not something we talk about. And I think like we're close. We're getting there to the point where people are going to know more people like you and me and be able to say, this problem isn't far away from me. I know somebody who's experienced this. I know my friends have changed their views on the justice system. My family has from seeing my experience. So I agree with you all that it's about talking about it. And until we talk about it and change the country, the leaders are going to follow the people. They're not going to lead. They're not going to go out on a limb. And the reason, that especially people who commit some crimes are, treated the way they are is not because of our leadership. It's because of our fellow citizens who don't have empathy for, and so that's why I feel like as an advocate, every time politicians don't do what I want, everyone says, oh, these guys, they're terrible, they stink. And I'm like, that's our fault. We have to work harder because they're going to do it if they thought it was in their interest. And they don't think it's in their interest because we didn't convince enough people yet. So, I think it's on us. Okay. Heather, this is a tough question you got, but I know you're open to tough questions. What would you say to a naysayer who might say, if your husband gets out, he'll reoffend?
That's an emotional-based response. That there's no statistics, there's no facts to support that. When you have a single-digit recidivism rate of 7, and that came from, that's on the internet, from Prison Policy Initiative, 7%, prove to me where your statistics are coming from. I get that sometimes, and I want you to prove to me. And they said, well, it's just happening in society. Where? If you can back it, then you can say it. But that's the problem with this crime, is there's more myths and untruths and emotions driving this without the facts, without the statistics, because it's who's going to really stand up for sex. I think I'm the first one here that's saying, let's talk about sex, because nobody wants to talk about it. So let's start focusing on where the truth is. And the nay haters, sometimes you can't rationalize with an irrational person. That's just a reality. Well, and those naysayers are going to be naysayers because they want to hide behind the emotion. I've also learned that somebody might have been affected, whether it was them or a family member. And I try to use the empathy and say, I'm sorry that happened to you. And let's put the emotions aside for a minute so that we can have the discussion. And when it's face to face, I get a lot further than on the computer, because they just cut you down and go, oh no, you don't know what you're talking about.
Yeah. Another question that came in, people get disheartened because they write their lawmakers and they don't get answers. And so I get that, people will sign our petitions, they'll sign our, the letters, they'll get a form response, and they think, nothing's happening. The truth is, it all matters. I mean, if you don't do it, then they're not hearing anything. Juanita, you decided to start a group to get even more active. What hope can you give to people, advice to give people as to why to get engaged and to get your voice heard?
I mean, don't give up. I mean, we've talked to an actual senator who was like, he doesn't really listen to people who are not his constituents, but there are many who will. So I get into people's direct messages. I'll send email. I do. I'm on Twitter. I'm on Twitter. I'm in your direct messages. I'm sending you emails. I'm finding other people who might know you, and guess what? I got relationships with them, so I'm emailing you saying so and so said I can send you listen, do not give up, because you're working against people's emotions, and we're trying to change people's thought processes and emotions. It's not even just about the law that you're trying to change. You have to actually change their minds. And then in order to do that, just keep sending them information about your loved one. Keep pushing at it, because it's not, someone who's incarcerated, his name is Antonio, because he would kill me if I didn't say his name.
Give me a shout out, Antonio. You're famous.
Yep, Antonio Shanklin. But he said to me when I got frustrated one day, he was like, this is like the Titanic, right? You can't whip a Titanic around, like you can a little speedboat. So you just got to keep chugging at it and keep chugging at it. And somebody is going to listen. You're going to get someone's attention, because I promise you, Sisters in Prison Reform is not going to stop, being a voice for people like Antoinette's son, or, Heather's husband, or, we're just not going to stop being voices for people who are incarcerated for extended periods of time, who deserve to be out here. You're going to just keep seeing us. So I would say that's the kind of advocacy that you need to keep doing. Keep going, keep pushing, keep talking to people.
Yeah, well said. I want to say to people, because people are asking about, if their loved one just got sentenced to a long sentence, and where can they find support. I do want to mention, if you're not aware of it, our Families in Action Facebook group, there's about 7,500 people there whose loved ones are in state and federal prison, committed all sorts of different offenses. And you will find support there. You will find information about, law developments in your state, or bills that are moving, or court cases. You'll find ways to take action. That's one thing I think you can do to sort of cure the helplessness, is take some action. Try to find something to do every day, to throw a brick at the wall and try to make some change. What other advice do you have for families who are just going through this now for the first time? There's some people who are asking, their loved ones are just been sentenced to a long sentence. How do you balance sort of your advocacy with also, Antoinette, we talk about this self-care. You have to have your life too. And so how do you balance those, and what would you recommend? Oh, you're muted. There you go.
Self-care is very important, because speaking for your loved one it's a lot of work, and it could get really emotional really quick. You could get burnt out. Don't ever give up speaking for your loved one, but at the same time, you have to do self-care. You have to take care of yourself, and you have to take time out to live your life too, because you could get sucked up into this and completely forget about self-care. I've been there and I've done that, and it don't help.
Yeah.
So if you do your self-care, then you'll be fuel for the fight. And so please never give up, get involved, and always talk about your loved ones, especially if it's at the beginning of the sentencing, because that's the hardest part. For me, it was the hardest to adjust, because you don't know how to adjust. You don't know what to do. You don't know who to turn to. And 9 times out of 10, when you try to turn to somebody, they turn their back on you. So it's very important to take care of yourself and your family, and just learn new ways to heal at the exact same time, because it's so important. Everybody needs healing. Everybody needs compassion. So self-care is my top priority now. And my son's my top priority at the same time. But I have to do self-care in order to stay together mentally and physically and spiritually.
Well, let me say this, not to embarrass you, but you're getting married.
Yes.
Which means you're getting on with your life. And I do think, let me just say, I was in prison for a short period of time, but the one thing that worried me most was thinking, I'd already done this to my family. I didn't want them suffering, worrying about me inside. So yes, there were times I felt lonely and I wanted to call or visit more, but I wanted them to get on with their life. I didn't want them to feel in prison with me. And so I do think, people in prison feel that way. I think on the outside, there's a feeling of guilt if you're not always fighting for the person and always advocating. And so I think you do have to find that balance.
That's true. And I wanted to say one more thing. Yes, I'm getting married. I'm on countdown. Yes, I'm extremely happy. But the first thing I had to tell my fiance was about my son in prison, and And that's the first thing I let him know. And I didn't do that in the past. I kept it quiet and just had a relationship. So, but now I'm healing. I'm doing a lot better mentally, physically, and spiritually. I was able to tell him I have a son doing life without parole, and it's his choice to stay or walk away.
Yeah.
But I had to be honest. So that's the most big part of being honest with yourself and just, yeah, live your life. Try to anyway.
Yeah. All right. So we got 5 minutes left. So usually what I do at this point is I go around and ask you to give any final thoughts, things that you didn't get, I didn't ask you, and that you wanted to make sure that you share. You cannot possibly plug Sisters in Prison Reform anymore. She is on message, this one. But I'm grateful for that. I do want to say, if you're not part of FAMM, please text FAMM, FAMM, to 21333 just to start getting our emails, texts, get on our list. If you don't find it useful, get off. But I think you're going to find that there's a lot of people going through what you're going through. And there is strength in numbers. And sometimes you can fight. Not every reform we're fighting for is going to affect your loved one directly. But if you fight for others, they'll fight for you. And that's the goal, is that we all fight for each other and we have a bigger army. So let's go around one last time. And Heather, I'll start with you.
Well, let me just say, when you have 27 million pornography sites going around, that's feeding this pornography problem, sex addiction problem, we need to start there. All of these sites have child pornography in them somewhere, somehow. And all of it is covered by the First Amendment, freedom of speech. Until we start going after that kind of stuff, we're not going to get anywhere. I attended what's called a porn epidemic. It was a conference by Josh McDowell, and he made a very profound statement. Child pornography will find you. You won't find it. We're not stopping it. We're not shutting down these websites. We're keeping them going and keeping them circulating. And that's where we need to get going and stopping it, and stopping the victimizing and the re-victimizing.
Thanks. I also want to just say it takes a lot of courage to talk about this, so I appreciate your being willing to do this.
Sure.
Juanita.
So go to Twitter. You know I'm going to do it. At the SIP 2021, follow us. You know, we're three women who are trying to get our loved ones out. Cordia Patterson, Jerry James, Sincere Allah, and also for me, also Antonio Shanklin. May 10th with Kevin, we will be having a conversation with Kevin Ring and Andy Elders as we talk about second look laws in VA, because they are necessary. And thank you very much for having me. I enjoyed it.
So grateful, and you're a great example of just like becoming more aware of this problem and then starting your own group. I mean, it's just great. So we need that in every state. So thank you. And I look forward to our talk next week. Antoinette.
Thank you, Kevin, for having me here. And, you know, and thank you for helping me find my voice, because FAMM is actually the hardcore to help me speak up and speak about my son. So I would encourage everybody to get involved with FAMM, become an advocate, go to Twitter, go to Facebook, Instagram. I'm on all of that, but I'm always under FAMM. So FAMM, thank you so much. And I hope somebody find compassion for our loved ones. And I pray that somebody talk to my son so they could, you know, pick up his case. So yeah, stay strong, never give up. Don't stop fighting for your loved one, and just keep going, and don't stop.
Mm-hmm.
And that's the biggest thing for me now, is just to keep talking. Now I can't shut up.
Yeah.
I was quiet. Now I just keep talking and talking. But it's all because having compassion and empathy for our loved ones on the inside, because Jay do deserve a second chance out here in the real world. So thank you very much, Kevin, for having me here.
Thank you. I'm so glad you joined us. I'm so glad you found your voice. You're eloquent, and people need to hear that. Let me just close by saying, first of all, I was dying to do this. We're going to do more of this. I like, we have to focus on this harder stuff. At FAMM, we made a commitment last year when we unveiled our Second Chances agenda to try to address extreme sentences. For 30 years, we've worked on fighting mandatory minimums. We're going to continue to do that. In some states, just eliminating the lower level mandatory minimums is still a big fight. I mean, in some of these states, they're not ready for the broader reform. But in other states where there is political will and we have the family army built and, there's other resources and partner groups, allies on the ground, we're going to fight for deeper sentencing reform. We want second look laws that allow everyone, no matter what offense they commit, to get a second chance, to get back before a judge. We want compassionate release laws that allow people who are older and sick and elderly not to have to die in prison for no reason but to get out. We want the governors and the president to use their clemency authority to also show mercy to people using these long sentences. We want prosecutors to use their ability to go back into court and seek new sentences for people who have been rehabilitated. So we're trying to create as many mechanisms for as many system actors to revisit these extreme sentences. That's going to be our goal for the foreseeable future as we try to pass these laws in as many states as possible. And to do that, we're going to have to talk about these types of offenses. And to do that, we're going to have to bring these people forward to show that everybody has a loved one in prison, that everyone's loved one matters, all of our pain is the same. And so with that, I want to thank our guest, thank the FAMM team for putting this together, and we'll see you in a couple weeks.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.